Colonel Julia Richardson stood at the head of the conference table, her uniform crisp at 0600 hours, the Fort Braxton morning light streaming through bulletproof windows. Her voice, steady and commanding, filled the briefing room as 20 senior officers leaned forward, absorbed by her tactical analysis of Middle East operations. The holographic display behind her showed supply routes through Afghanistan, each red line representing months of strategic planning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The southern corridor remains our most vulnerable point, Julia said, her finger tracing the digital map. Intelligence suggests hostile forces are repositioning here. She clicked to the next slide, revealing troop movements that would have impressed Pentagon generals. I recommend we reinforce Alpha Company with additional air support and establish checkpoints at these 3 locations. General Martinez nodded from the back row, her 3 stars glinting. The other officers scribbled notes, their respect evident in the room's focused silence. Julia had commanded attention in briefing rooms from Kandahar to Washington, her Bronze Star and Purple Heart earned through blood and brilliance in combat zones where lesser officers had crumbled. Questions, Julia asked, scanning the room. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison shifted uncomfortably, his mediocre service record making him reluctant to challenge her tactical expertise. Only Colonel Derek Whitmore, seated at the table's far end, seemed unmoved by the presentation. His pale blue eyes held something cold, calculating. The briefing concluded with handshakes and congratulations. "Outstanding work, Colonel," said Major Peterson, a logistics officer. "Your supply chain analysis will save lives." Julia accepted the praise with quiet professionalism, but her eyes found Whitmore already heading for the door, his exit deliberate and pointed. 20 minutes later, Julia knocked on Whitmore's office door. The nameplate read Colonel Derek T. Whitmore, Base Operations Commander, his family's military legacy evident in the West Point photos lining the walls. His grandfather had served in World War II, his father in Vietnam. Julia's own achievement photos seemed small by comparison, though her combat decorations outshone anything in Whitmore's display case. "Come in, Richardson," Whitmore said without looking up at his computer. The casual use of her surname without rank was the first slight. Julia had noticed these microaggressions increasing over recent months, each one carefully calibrated to stay just below formal complaint territory. "Sir, I wanted to discuss the timeline for my brigadier general promotion," Julia said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Her service record spoke for itself. 20 years of exemplary performance, multiple combat tours, advanced degrees from the War College. The promotion should have been routine. Whitmore finally looked up, his smile thin and practiced. "Ah, yes, your promotion." He shuffled papers unnecessarily, a theatrical display of busyness. "Well, Julia, these things take time. The Pentagon is very particular about cultural fit at the general level." The phrase hung in the air like poison gas. Cultural fit. Julia had heard it before, always from white officers explaining why qualified black candidates weren't quite ready for advancement. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. "Sir, my record speaks to my qualifications. 3 combat tours, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, top marks in all efficiency reports." Of course, he waved dismissively. But leadership at the flag level requires more than just technical competence. There are concerns about your approach to traditional military values. The accusation was skillfully crafted. Any response would sound defensive. Any challenge would confirm his narrative about her being difficult. Julia recognized the trap, one that had ensnared countless qualified officers who looked like her. "I see," she said finally. "Is there a specific timeline for the promotion board's decision?" "These things move at their own pace," he replied, already turning back to his computer. "I'm sure you understand." Julia left her office with her composure intact, but her hands trembled slightly as she walked down the corridor. The base hummed with afternoon activity, soldiers saluting as she passed, their respect genuine and earned. She returned each salute precisely, her military bearing flawless despite the anger burning in her chest. In her own office, Julia pulled out her service jacket, the thick folder containing 20 years of exemplary evaluations. Every fitness report glowed with praise. Superior tactical knowledge, natural leader under pressure, recommended for immediate promotion to flag rank. Her fingers traced the Purple Heart citation, awarded after she'd carried 2 wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire in Helmand Province. The Bronze Star recommendation, written by Colonel Tom Bradley, still made her chest swell with pride. Colonel Richardson displayed exceptional courage and tactical brilliance during Operation Desert Storm. Her leadership prevented catastrophic losses and demonstrated the finest traditions of the United States Army. But none of it seemed to matter when facing Whitmore's concerns about cultural fit. Julia's secure phone buzzed. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and Julia felt her shoulders ease slightly. Her wife's timing was perfect, as always.
"How did it go?" Dr. Sarah Richardson Williams asked, her psychologist's intuition picking up the tension in Julia's silence. "About as expected," Julia replied, settling into her chair. The office door was closed, but she kept her voice low anyway. Cultural fit issues, apparently. Sarah's intake of breath was sharp. They'd both seen this pattern before, the coded language that kept qualified black officers from advancing. "Same old game?" "Same old game," Julia confirmed, rubbing her temples. The headache that had started during Whitmore's meeting was spreading. 20 years of service, and I'm still proving I belong." "You more than belong," Sarah said fiercely. "You've earned every accolade, every commendation. Your record is flawless." Julia stared out her window at the parade ground, watching young soldiers drill in the afternoon heat. She'd been like them once, full of faith that merit would triumph over prejudice. Now, at 42, she knew better. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm fighting a war I can never win," she admitted, the words slipping out despite her usual caution about discussing such things over military phones. "Hey," Sarah's voice softened, "you've won every battle that mattered. Don't let one narrow-minded colonel make you forget that." Julia nodded, though Sarah couldn't see her. The afternoon sun slanted through her blinds, casting prison bar shadows across her desk. Outside, the American flag snapped in the wind, its colors bright against the North Carolina sky. The promotion would come, eventually. It had to. But as Julia hung up the phone and returned to her paperwork, Colonel Whitmore's words echoed in her mind. Cultural fit, traditional military values, team cohesion over individual advancement. The coded language of institutional racism, delivered with a smile and a handshake, designed to make her doubt herself while maintaining plausible deniability. Julia straightened her shoulders and opened the next file. She had work to do. The staff meeting the following Tuesday began like any other, with Julia presenting her weekly operational report to Fort Braxton senior leadership. The conference room buzzed with the usual pre-meeting chatter, officers discussing weekend plans and upcoming training exercises. Julia arranged her notes at the podium, her slides ready on the projection screen. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying the authority earned through 2 decades of command. "This week's operational overview focuses on the joint training exercise with the 82nd Airborne." The presentation flowed smoothly until slide 7, when she outlined the logistical requirements for the exercise. Julia had coordinated similar operations dozens of times, her expertise in military logistics recognized throughout the Army. But as she explained the supply chain management strategy, Colonel Whitmore interrupted. "Excuse me, Colonel Richardson. Are you certain those numbers are accurate?" The room fell silent. Julia paused, her laser pointer hovering over the screen. The figures were meticulously researched, triple-checked by her staff. "Yes, sir, they've been verified through appropriate channels." Whitmore leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "Because the math doesn't seem to add up. Perhaps you could walk us through your calculations again." Heat crept up her neck, but her voice remained steady. "Certainly, sir." She clicked back to the previous slide, explaining each figure with precision. The numbers were flawless, as they always were.
Around the table, other officers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the inappropriate nature of Whitmore's challenge. Major Peterson, who had worked with Julia on numerous operations, spoke up. Colonel Richardson's logistics work has always been exemplary. His intervention was subtle but clear support. Whitmore's smile was thin. Of course, I'm simply ensuring we maintain our standards. The implication hung in the air that Julia's standards might not be sufficient. From the back of the room, Captain Lisa Chen watched the exchange with sharp eyes. As Julia's aide, she had observed months of similar interactions. Her notebook, ostensibly for meeting minutes, captured something else entirely. Dates, times, witnesses to each incident of professional undermining. The meeting concluded without further interruption, but the damage was done. Julia's expertise had been publicly questioned without cause, her competence called into doubt before her peers. As officers filed out, she noticed the sympathetic glances, the awkward avoidances, the political calculations already beginning. "Colonel," Captain Chen approached as the room emptied, "your calculations were perfect. I double-checked them myself." Julia nodded, gathering her materials. "I know, Lisa, but thank you." Chen's expression was troubled. "Ma'am, this isn't the first time." "I'm aware," Julia replied, her tone carefully neutral. But privately, she was grateful for Chen's observation. At least someone else was seeing the pattern. That afternoon, Julia's brother David called from Fort Campbell, where he served as a major with the 101st Airborne. Their weekly check-ins had become a lifeline, a connection to family that transcended military hierarchy. "You sound tired, sis," David observed after she had updated him on base operations. Her younger brother had always been able to read her moods even over the phone. "Just the usual," Julia replied, but her voice carried the weight of recent frustrations. "Bullshit," David said bluntly. "What's really going on?" Julia hesitated, then found herself describing Whitmore's recent behavior. David listened without interruption, his silence growing more ominous with each example.
"That son of a bitch!" he finally exploded. "Julia, you can't let him get away with this." "It's nothing I can prove," she said, staring out her quarters window at the evening formation. "He's too smart to be overtly racist. Everything has plausible deniability." "Plausible deniability, my ass," David fumed. "This is systematic harassment, and you know it." Julia did know it. The missed invitations to key meetings, the delayed paperwork, the public challenges to her expertise. Each incident was small, but together they formed a clear pattern of obstruction. "I need to be careful," she said finally. "One wrong move, and I become the angry black woman who can't take constructive criticism." David's sigh was heavy. "The game is rigged, Julia. It's always been rigged." After hanging up, Julia sat in her quarters kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and reviewing the day's events. The familiar anger simmered beneath her professional composure, threatening to boil over. 20 years of service, and she still faced the same coded discrimination that had plagued her career from the beginning. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How was your day?" The question, simple on its surface, carried layers of concern and support. "Challenging," Julia replied. "Whitmore's escalating." "Document everything," came Sarah's immediate response. "You'll need evidence." Julia nodded to her empty kitchen. Sarah was right, of course. But documentation required careful strategy. Too little, and there was no case. Too much, and she risked being labeled paranoid or vindictive. Meanwhile, 200 miles away in the Pentagon, General Patricia Martinez sat in a secure conference room with Secretary Harrison, their conversation classified at the highest levels. The walls displayed portraits of former defense secretaries, an unbroken line of white men stretching back decades. "The president is serious about diversifying senior leadership," Harrison said, his weathered face reflecting years of military service. "She wants the best candidates, regardless of traditional demographics." Martinez nodded, her own rise to 3-star rank having taught her the challenges faced by officers who didn't fit the historical mold. Julia Richardson is the obvious choice. Her record is impeccable. I've seen her file, Harrison agreed. Combat decorations, advanced degrees, perfect efficiency reports. She's more qualified than half the current Joint Chiefs. They both knew the unspoken challenge, convincing a military establishment still uncomfortable with change. The Pentagon's marble corridors had echoed with whispered concerns about political correctness and lowered standards whenever diverse candidates were considered for senior positions. The president wants to move quickly, Martinez said. The announcement should come within 8 weeks. Harrison stood, moving to the window overlooking the Potomac. Richardson doesn't know about the selection process? No, sir. The president insisted on complete secrecy until the formal announcement. It was the military way, decisions made at the highest levels filtering down through layers of command. Julia Richardson, the subject of their discussion, remained unaware that her career was about to take a historic turn. Back at Fort Braxton, Julia finished her evening report and prepared for another day of navigating Whitmore's obstruction. Captain Chen's documentation continued, a careful record of discrimination disguised as leadership oversight. The pattern was emerging, clear to those willing to see it. But patterns could be disrupted, and Julia Richardson was about to discover that her excellence had been noticed in the highest circles of American power. The game was indeed rigged, as her brother had said, but sometimes the players themselves could change the rules. The Pentagon's E-ring corridor stretched before Julia like a marble canyon, its walls lined with portraits of military legends whose eyes seemed to follow her progress. Her dress blues were immaculate, her ribbons and decorations telling the story of 20 years' distinguished service. But as she approached General Martinez's office, Julia felt the familiar weight of uncertainty that had plagued her recent months at Fort Braxton. The secure anteroom buzzed with activity as colonels and generals moved between meetings, their conversations conducted in the careful tones of those who knew secrets could reshape nations. Julia announced herself to Martinez's aide, a sharp-eyed major who gestured toward the inner office door. "Colonel Richardson, to see you, ma'am," the aide announced. General Patricia Martinez looked up from her classified briefing folder, her 3 stars catching the morning light. At 54, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had shattered barriers and rebuilt them stronger. Her rise to 3-star rank had made her the highest-ranking Latina in the Army, a distinction that came with both pride and responsibility. "Julia," Martinez said, rising from her desk. Her embrace was brief, but warm, the gesture of a mentor who had guided Julia through the treacherous waters of military advancement. "You look like hell." Julia's laugh was hollow. "That bad?" "Bad enough," Martinez replied, gesturing to the leather chairs arranged around a small conference table. "Coffee? You're going to need it." As Martinez poured from an elegant silver service, Julia studied her mentor's office. The walls displayed Martinez's own journey, photos from combat zones, awards from grateful allies, and a small painting of her hometown in Texas. It was the office of someone who had earned every accolade through merit and determination. "Tell me about Whitmore," Martinez said, settling across from Julia with her coffee cup cradled in both hands.
Julia had prepared for this conversation, but finding the right words proved difficult. How do you explain the death by 1,000 cuts that constituted modern discrimination? The missed meetings, the questioned decisions, the coded language that undermined authority while maintaining plausible deniability. "He's blocking my promotion," Julia said finally, not overtly but systematically. Cultural fit concerns, questions about my leadership style, delays in paperwork submission. Martinez's expression darkened. She had faced similar challenges during her own rise, the subtle resistance that greeted officers who challenged traditional demographics. Specific examples? Julia recounted recent incidents, the public questioning of her logistics expertise, the exclusion from strategic planning meetings, the whispered concerns about her approach to traditional military values. With each example, Martinez's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Son of a bitch," Martinez muttered, then caught herself. "Sorry, continue." "It's systematic," Julia continued. "Captain Chen has been documenting incidents, but nothing that would survive scrutiny from investigators predisposed to give Whitmore the benefit of the doubt." Martinez leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled in thought. Behind her, the Pentagon's maze of corridors hummed with the business of national defense, but this office felt insulated from that activity, a sanctuary where truth could be spoken without political calculation. "Julia," Martinez said carefully, "sometimes the Army moves at its own pace. Changes that seem delayed might be part of larger strategic considerations." The words were cryptic, laden with meaning that Julia couldn't quite decipher. Martinez's expression suggested hidden knowledge, secrets that couldn't be shared despite their long relationship. "Ma'am, are you telling me to be patient? Because I've been patient for 20 years. I've exceeded every standard, earned every accolade, and I'm still being questioned about cultural fit." "I'm telling you," Martinez said slowly, "that sometimes the universe has plans we can't see. Sometimes our struggles prepare us for opportunities we never imagined." Before Julia could respond, Martinez's aide knocked and entered. "Ma'am, the secretary is ready for your 11 o'clock briefing." Martinez stood, but her eyes remained fixed on Julia. "Trust the process. Trust that excellence is recognized even when it doesn't feel that way." Julia left the Pentagon more confused than when she arrived. Martinez's cryptic encouragement felt like a dismissal, another version of the patience counseling that had characterized her entire career. But something in her mentor's manner suggested deeper currents, secrets that couldn't be shared even between trusted allies. The drive back to Fort Braxton gave her time to process the conversation. Martinez had seemed almost relieved by Julia's visit, as if she had been waiting for this exact discussion. But why the mysterious references to larger plans and hidden opportunities? Julia's phone rang as she entered North Carolina airspace. The caller ID showed Colonel Tom Bradley, her former commander from Afghanistan and one of the most respected officers in the Army. His retirement from active duty had freed him from the political constraints that often silenced serving officers. "Julia," Bradley's gravelly voice filled the car through the Bluetooth system. "Heard you might need some support with that promotion board." "Sir, I didn't realize word had spread." "Word always spreads, especially when a good officer is getting screwed by politics. I've already written a letter to the promotion board. Want to know what I said?" "Yes, sir." Bradley's voice took on the formal tone of official correspondence. "I stated that Colonel Julia Richardson represents the finest traditions of the United States Army, her tactical brilliance under fire, her unwavering commitment to her soldiers, and her innovative approaches to complex problems make her an ideal candidate for general officer rank." Julia felt tears threaten, her professional composure cracking slightly. Bradley had commanded her during some of the most intense fighting in Afghanistan, where her decisions had saved lives and secured strategic objectives. "There's more," Bradley continued. "I mentioned specific examples, the convoy ambush where you organized the defense that prevented catastrophic casualties, the supply line operation that kept 3 forward bases operational during the spring offensive, and your leadership during the casualty evacuation that earned you the Bronze Star." "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just keep being the officer I trained. The Army needs leaders like you, regardless of what narrow-minded assholes like Whitmore think." After Bradley hung up, Julia felt a spark of hope for the first time in months. At least some of the Army's leadership recognized her contributions and supported her advancement. But the institutional barriers remained formidable, and Whitmore's obstruction continued to threaten her career trajectory. That evening, over dinner at Fort Braxton, Julia shared the day's developments with Sarah. Her wife listened with the focused attention of a trained psychologist,
asking clarifying questions and offering insights drawn from her own experience with military culture. Martinez knows something, Sarah concluded after hearing about the Pentagon meeting. Her responses were too calculated, too cryptic. That's what I thought, Julia agreed, pushing food around her plate without appetite. But if she knows something, why won't she share it? Sarah considered the question, her analytic mind working through possibilities. Maybe she can't. Maybe she's bound by classification levels or political considerations. Or maybe she's just counseling patients like everyone else.
No, Sarah said firmly. You've described Martinez as direct, honest, someone who speaks truth to power. If she's being evasive, there's a reason. Julia nodded, but her frustration remained. 20 years of service had taught her that the military moved slowly, that change came through incremental progress rather than revolutionary leaps. But patience felt like capitulation when facing systematic discrimination. "I'm thinking about involving a military lawyer," she said finally, making the complaint formal. Sarah's expression grew concerned. "That's a significant escalation. Once you file formal charges, there's no going back." "I know, but what's the alternative? Accept Whitmore's obstruction and hope he eventually gets tired of blocking my advancement?" They both knew the answer. Officers like Whitmore didn't tire of exercising power over those they considered unworthy. The discrimination would continue until someone forced a confrontation. "Let's gather more evidence first," Sarah suggested. "Make sure the case is ironclad before you file." Julia agreed, but privately wondered if any amount of evidence would be sufficient to overcome institutional bias. The military's investigative process, while theoretically impartial, often reflected the prejudices of its investigators. As she prepared for bed that night, Julia reflected on the day's conversations. Bradley's support was encouraging, but one retired colonel's endorsement couldn't overcome systematic obstruction. Martinez's cryptic comments suggested hidden knowledge, but knowledge that remained frustratingly inaccessible. The promotion to brigadier general should have been routine, a recognition of outstanding service and demonstrated leadership. Instead, it had become a battleground where her qualifications were questioned and her character was impugned. But Julia Richardson hadn't survived 3 combat tours by accepting defeat easily. If Whitmore wanted a fight, she would give him one. The question was whether the institutional army would support merit over prejudice when the battle became public. The answer to that question would determine not just her career, but the future of military leadership in an increasingly diverse America. Captain Lisa Chen's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard in Julia's outer office, her screens displaying a carefully organized database of incidents. Each entry contained timestamps, witnesses, and detailed descriptions of Whitmore's discriminatory behavior. What had started as informal documentation had evolved into a comprehensive case file. "Colonel, you need to see this," Chen called out, her voice tight with controlled anger. Julia entered Chen's workspace, noting the tension in her aide's shoulders. On the screen, an email thread between Whitmore and Lieutenant Colonel Morrison glowed with damning evidence. "He's been spreading rumors," Chen explained, scrolling through the messages. "Morrison forwarded these to me, thinking you should know what they're saying about you." The emails were carefully worded, maintaining plausible deniability while assassinating Julia's character. Phrases like "concerning leadership decisions" and "questions of judgment under pressure" painted a picture of incompetence that contradicted her exemplary record. Julia read silently, her jaw tightening with each coded insult. Whitmore had been methodical, building a narrative that would justify denying her promotion while appearing concerned rather than racist. "Ma'am," Chen continued, pulling up another document, "I've also been reaching out discreetly to other black officers on base. The pattern extends beyond you." The testimonies were heartbreaking. Major Williams described being excluded from advancement opportunities despite superior performance ratings. Captain Johnson detailed how Whitmore had questioned his cultural compatibility with traditional Army values. Each story followed the same script: excellence punished, potential stifled, careers derailed through systematic discrimination. That evening, Julia reviewed the evidence at home while Sarah prepared dinner. Their daughter Alexis, home from school, noticed the tension immediately. "Mom, you look stressed," Alexis observed, her 16-year-old directness cutting through Julia's professional composure. Julia closed the laptop, forcing a smile. "Just work stuff, sweetheart." But Alexis wasn't fooled. "Is it about your promotion? Dad mentioned you've been having problems with your boss." Sarah appeared in the doorway, her psychologist's intuition recognizing a teachable moment. "Your mother is dealing with some unfair treatment at work." "Discrimination?" Alexis asked, their generation's comfort with addressing racism directly contrasted with Julia's military caution. Julia nodded slowly. "Yes, but we're documenting everything, building a case." "Good," Alexis said fiercely. "Fight back. Don't let them win." Her daughter's unwavering support strengthened Julia's resolve. She was fighting not just for her own career, but for the next generation of military leaders who deserved better than the discrimination she had endured. The following week brought Whitmore's most damaging attack yet. Julia's annual performance review, traditionally a formality given her outstanding record, contained devastating criticisms. Her leadership was described as divisive, her decision-making questionable, and her attitude concerning. The review contradicted every previous evaluation in her file, but it would become the official record used by promotion boards. Whitmore had weaponized the system against her, using his authority to create documentation that would follow her throughout her career. Chen found Julia staring at the review in her office, the document's lies burning like acid on the page. "Ma'am, this is character assassination," Chen said quietly. "We have enough evidence now. It's time to file the complaint." Julia nodded, her decision crystallizing. 20 years of patience and professionalism had earned her nothing but systematic humiliation. If Whitmore wanted a fight, she would give him one.
But as she prepared to challenge the system that had shaped her entire adult life, Julia couldn't shake the memory of General Martinez's cryptic words about larger plans and hidden opportunities. Whatever secrets her mentor harbored, they would have to wait. The fight for her military soul was about to begin. The Equal Opportunity Office at Fort Braxton occupied a sterile building on the base's periphery, its bland architecture reflecting the military's discomfort with addressing discrimination. Julia walked through its doors carrying a manila folder thick with evidence, her decision to file formal charges representing a point of no return. Captain Jennifer Walsh, the EO officer, reviewed the complaint with professional detachment. Her expression grew increasingly grave as she absorbed months of documented discrimination, her pen scratching notes across legal forms. "Colonel Richardson, you understand the seriousness of these allegations?" Walsh asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I understand the seriousness of the discrimination I've endured," Julia replied, her tone steady despite the magnitude of her decision. Walsh nodded, sealing the complaint in an official envelope. "Colonel Whitmore will be notified within 24 hours. I recommend you prepare for his response." Whitmore's retaliation came swiftly and viciously. Within hours of receiving notification, he filed countercharges accusing Julia of insubordination, unprofessional conduct, and creating a hostile work environment. His documentation, hastily assembled but politically astute, painted Julia as a disruptive officer who blamed others for her professional failures. The base's atmosphere shifted immediately. Officers who had previously maintained cordial relationships with Julia now avoided eye contact in the corridors. The complaint had forced everyone to choose sides, creating factions that threatened the unit's cohesion. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, Whitmore's loyal ally, began spreading whispers about Julia's victim mentality and reverse racism. His influence extended throughout the officer corps, poisoning relationships that Julia had cultivated over years of service. But not everyone abandoned her. Sergeant Major Roberto Santos, a gruff career soldier with 25 years of service, sought Julia out in her office. "Ma'am," Santos said, his weathered face serious, "the enlisted folks are behind you. We've seen how Colonel Whitmore operates, and we know quality leadership when we see it." His support was crucial. Santos commanded respect throughout the enlisted ranks, his endorsement carrying weight that transcended racial boundaries. If the base's senior non-commissioned officers supported Julia, Whitmore's narrative of divisiveness would crumble. "Thank you, Sergeant Major," Julia said, genuinely moved by his loyalty. "Ma'am, I've served under officers of every color and background. You're one of the best I've seen. Don't let them convince you otherwise." The investigation began immediately, with military police interviewing witnesses and reviewing documents. Julia watched colleagues parade through the investigative offices, knowing that each testimony would shape her career's trajectory. Captain Chen testified powerfully about the systematic discrimination she had witnessed, her documentation providing irrefutable evidence of Whitmore's bias. Colonel Bradley, despite his retirement status, submitted sworn statements detailing Julia's exemplary combat leadership. But Whitmore's supporters rallied as well. Morrison testified about Julia's alleged attitude problems, carefully avoiding overtly racist language while implying that her promotion concerns reflected personal inadequacy rather than discrimination. The base became a battlefield, where careers were weapons and reputations were casualties. Julia maintained her professional duties while knowing that every interaction was scrutinized, every decision analyzed for evidence supporting either side's narrative. Anonymous threats began appearing in her quarters mailbox, racist slurs scrawled on official stationery. The messages escalated from verbal abuse to implied physical violence, forcing base security to increase patrols around Julia's family housing. Sarah noticed the stress consuming her wife, the strong officer she had married becoming increasingly isolated and defensive. "Julia, this is destroying you," Sarah observed during a quiet evening at home. "I can't stop now. If I withdraw the complaint, Whitmore wins. Every black officer who comes after me will face the same discrimination." Sarah understood the larger implications, but worried about the personal cost. Julia was fighting for principle while her career hung in the balance, knowing that even victory might leave her professionally damaged. The formal hearing was scheduled for the following month, a military tribunal that would determine both officers' futures. Julia prepared her testimony while Whitmore marshaled his defenses, their conflict consuming the base's attention and energy. In quiet moments, Julia wondered if General Martinez's mysterious encouragement had prepared her for this battle. The mentor's cryptic references to larger plans and hidden opportunities seemed increasingly prophetic as Julia's military career approached its defining moment. The military investigators arrived at Fort Braxton like forensic archaeologists, their mission to excavate truth from layers of institutional secrecy and personal animosity. Major Patricia Vance, the lead investigator from the Inspector General's office, carried herself with the neutral authority of someone who had seen every form of military misconduct. Her team established operations in a secure conference room, its walls soon covered with organizational charts, timeline matrices, and evidence photographs. The investigation would be thorough, professional, and potentially career-ending for multiple officers.
Julia's first interview lasted 3 hours, Major Vance methodically reviewing every incident in Captain Chen's documentation. The questions were precise, designed to establish patterns while avoiding the emotional rhetoric that could undermine legal proceedings. "Colonel Richardson, describe Colonel Whitmore's behavior during the September staff meeting," Vance instructed, her digital recorder capturing every word. Julia recounted the public questioning of her logistics expertise, the theatrical skepticism that had undermined her authority before her peers. Vance's expression remained neutral, but her follow-up questions suggested she recognized the discriminatory nature of Whitmore's conduct. "Were there witnesses to this behavior?" "Yes, ma'am. Major Peterson, Lieutenant Colonel Harper, and several others were present." The investigators interviewed each witness separately, their testimonies painting a consistent picture of systematic discrimination disguised as professional oversight. Major Peterson confirmed that Julia's logistics work was exemplary, making Whitmore's public challenges appear motivated by bias rather than legitimate concern.
But the investigation also revealed uncomfortable truths about Fort Braxton's command climate. Previous discrimination complaints against Whitmore had been buried in bureaucratic procedures, their resolution favoring institutional stability over justice. 3 black officers had requested transfers rather than challenge Whitmore's authority, their careers damaged by his systematic obstruction. Colonel Tom Bradley's testimony, delivered via secure video from his Virginia retirement home, proved devastating to Whitmore's defense. His weathered face filled the screen as he described Julia's combat leadership with passionate conviction. Colonel Richardson saved lives in Afghanistan, Bradley stated, his voice carrying the authority of battlefield experience. Her tactical decisions during the Helmand Province operation prevented catastrophic casualties. Any suggestion that she lacks leadership capability is either ignorant or malicious. Bradley's service record was impeachable, his Bronze Star and Distinguished Service Cross representing the Army's highest traditions. His endorsement of Julia carried weight that transcended racial politics, forcing even skeptical investigators to acknowledge her exceptional qualifications. Whitmore's interview revealed a man under siege, his careful composure cracking under prosecutorial pressure. He denied discriminatory intent while struggling to explain the pattern of behavior documented by Chen's meticulous records. "I hold all officers to high standards," Whitmore insisted, his voice defensive. Colonel Richardson's promotion concerns reflect legitimate questions about her readiness for flag rank. "What specific deficiencies justify those concerns?" Major Vance asked, her tone professionally neutral but implicative. Whitmore's responses grew increasingly incoherent, his reliance on coded language becoming obvious under direct questioning. References to cultural fit and traditional values exposed the discriminatory assumptions underlying his professional judgments. The investigation's scope expanded as other black officers found courage to report their experiences. Major Williams detailed how Whitmore had blocked his advancement to lieutenant colonel, questioning his commitment to Army values despite superior performance ratings. Captain Johnson described exclusion from career-enhancing assignments, his potential stifled through systematic marginalization. Julia watched the investigation unfold with mixed emotions. Each revelation vindicated her decision to file the complaint, but also highlighted the scope of Whitmore's discriminatory impact. How many careers had been damaged by his prejudice? How many talented officers had been lost to the Army through his systematic obstruction? The base's atmosphere grew increasingly toxic as the investigation continued. Officers avoided choosing sides publicly while privately calculating the political implications of their testimonies. Julia found herself isolated from former colleagues who feared association with a controversial figure. Anonymous threats escalated, their messages becoming increasingly specific and menacing. Base security increased patrols around Julia's quarters, their presence a visible reminder of the hatred her complaint had unleashed. "Colonel Richardson receives more protection than the base commander," one unsigned note observed. "That will change." Sarah insisted they report the threats to civilian authorities, but Julia worried about appearing weak or paranoid. The military's warrior culture discouraged acknowledging vulnerability, even when facing credible danger. Captain Chen remained steadfast in her support, her loyalty unwavering despite pressure from Whitmore's allies. Her career was now linked to Julia's, her future dependent on the investigation's outcome. "Ma'am, whatever happens, we did the right thing," Chen assured Julia during a private moment in their shared office space. Julia nodded, but privately wondered if moral victory was worth the professional destruction they might face. The investigation would conclude soon, its findings determining not just their careers, but the message Fort Braxton would send about discriminating against black officers. As Major Vance prepared her final report, Julia reflected on the courage required to challenge institutional racism. The investigation had exposed uncomfortable truths about military culture, forcing a reckoning that many preferred to avoid. General Martinez's cryptic encouragement seemed increasingly prophetic. Perhaps the universe did have plans that transcended individual struggles, purposes that justified personal sacrifice for larger causes. The military tribunal convened in Fort Braxton's largest courtroom, its oak-paneled walls bearing witness to decades of military justice. Colonel Julia Richardson entered wearing her dress blues, her ribbons and decorations telling a story of exemplary service that contrasted sharply with the charges she faced. Media representatives filled the gallery, their cameras capturing a moment that would define military equal opportunity enforcement.
The presiding officer, Colonel Sandra Hayes, called the proceedings to order with the weight of institutional authority. Her gray hair and stern demeanor
reflected 30 years of military service, her reputation for fairness preceding her arrival at Fort Braxton. Flanking her were 2 additional officers, their expressions carefully neutral as they prepared to judge their colleagues' fate. Julia's military counsel, Major Rebecca Torres, presented opening arguments that transformed months of discrimination into a coherent narrative of systematic oppression. Her voice carried the conviction of an advocate who believed deeply in her client's cause. "The evidence will show," Torres declared, that Colonel Whitmore engaged in a pattern of discriminatory behavior designed to prevent Colonel Richardson's advancement based solely on her race. The prosecution's opening was more cautious, focusing on military order and discipline rather than addressing racial bias directly. Captain Mark Stevens, representing the government, portrayed Julia as a disgruntled officer who had weaponized discrimination charges to explain her professional shortcomings. Julia took the stand with military bearing, her testimony precise and emotionally controlled. She recounted each incident of discrimination with clinical detail, her voice never wavering despite the personal pain of reliving systematic humiliation. "Colonel Whitmore questioned my logistics expertise publicly, despite my exemplary record in that field," she testified. "His challenges served no professional purpose beyond undermining my authority before my peers." Under cross-examination, Captain Stevens attempted to portray Julia as oversensitive, her perceptions colored by unfounded suspicions of racism. But Julia's responses were measured and factual, her military training serving her well under hostile questioning. "Captain Stevens, are you suggesting that 3 combat tours, a Bronze Star, and a Purple Heart reflect oversensitivity?" Julia asked, her composure unshaken. Colonel Whitmore's testimony revealed a man struggling to justify years of discriminatory conduct. His explanations grew increasingly convoluted as Major Torres methodically dismantled his claims of legitimate professional concern. "You testified that Colonel Richardson lacked cultural fit for general officer rank," Torres observed. "Please define what you mean by cultural fit." Whitmore's face reddened as he struggled to articulate his meaning without revealing racist assumptions. "Traditional military values, leadership qualities that reflect Army heritage." "And those qualities exclude black women?" Torres pressed. "That's not what I said," Whitmore protested, but his discomfort was evident to everyone present. Captain Chen's testimony provided devastating documentation of Whitmore's systematic discrimination. Her meticulous records, presented with prosecutorial precision, revealed patterns that transcended individual incidents. "I documented 47 instances of discriminatory behavior over 18 months, Chen testified. "The pattern was consistent and escalating." Sergeant Major Santos took the stand wearing his dress uniform, his rows of ribbons reflecting 25 years of distinguished service. His testimony carried the authenticity of an enlisted soldier who had observed leadership at its best and worst. "Colonel Richardson is one of the finest officers I've served under," Santos declared. "Her leadership in combat and garrison settings reflect the Army's highest traditions. Any suggestion otherwise is either ignorant or motivated by prejudice." Colonel Bradley's video testimony from Virginia provided the hearing's most powerful moment. His weathered face filled the courtroom screen as he described Julia's combat leadership with passionate conviction. "I commanded Colonel Richardson during some of the heaviest fighting in Afghanistan," he stated. "She saved American lives through tactical brilliance and personal courage. Her qualifications for general officer rank are unquestionable." The defense called multiple witnesses who testified about Whitmore's pattern of discriminating against black officers. Major Williams described his own blocked advancement. Captain Johnson detailed systematic exclusion from career-enhancing assignments. Each testimony reinforced the prosecution's narrative of institutional racism disguised as professional judgment. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison's testimony for the defense proved disastrous under Torres's cross-examination. His claims about Julia's attitude problems crumbled when confronted with documented evidence of her exemplary leadership. Major Morrison, you testified that Colonel Richardson created a hostile work environment, yet enlisted personnel consistently rate her as their preferred commanding officer. How do you reconcile this contradiction? Morrison's stammered responses revealed the hollowness of Whitmore's defense. His testimony appeared motivated by personal loyalty rather than factual observation. The media coverage intensified as the hearing progressed, national news outlets framing the case as a test of military commitment to equal opportunity. Julia found herself reluctantly becoming a symbol of resistance against institutional racism. Her personal struggle transformed into a broader civil rights narrative. Anonymous threats escalated during the hearing, forcing increased security measures around the courthouse. The hatred her courage had unleashed demonstrated the stakes involved in challenging military discrimination. As closing arguments concluded, Julia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 20 years of service had culminated in a public battle for her professional dignity, her case potentially reshaping military culture for future generations of diverse officers. The tribunal recessed to deliberate, their decision carrying implications far beyond individual careers. Julia waited with her legal team and family, knowing that her military future hung in the balance, while larger forces prepared to reshape her destiny in ways she couldn't yet imagine.
Julia's secure phone rang at precisely 0700 hours, the caller ID displaying only "classified" in stark white letters. She answered with military precision, her voice betraying none of the anxiety that had consumed her since the tribunal's recess. "Colonel Richardson, this is Chief of Staff Margaret Chen calling from the White House." The voice was crisp, professional, carrying the authority of executive power. "The President requests your immediate presence for a classified briefing. Transportation has been arranged." Julia's pulse quickened, her mind racing through possibilities. Presidential summons were rare for colonels, typically reserved for crisis situations or highly classified operations. The timing, coming during her tribunal recess, seemed ominous. Within hours, she found herself in an unmarked government sedan speeding toward Washington, D.C., her escort silent and professional. The Virginia countryside blurred past her window as she contemplated potential reasons for this mysterious summons. Had the tribunal reached a decision? Was she being reassigned to avoid further controversy? The White House's West Wing entrance appeared more imposing than Julia had imagined, its security checkpoints reflecting the gravity of American power. Secret Service agents processed her credentials with efficiency that spoke to preparation and advanced planning. Chief of Staff Chen met her personally, her handshake firm and her expression unreadable. "Colonel Richardson, the President is eager to meet with you. Please follow me." The Oval Office's grandeur struck Julia immediately, its historical weight tangible in every detail. Presidential portraits gazed down from the walls, while the resolute desk commanded the room's center, its polished surface reflecting afternoon sunlight streaming through bulletproof windows. President Amanda Foster rose from behind the desk, her presence filling the room with executive authority. At 58, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had shattered barriers throughout her political career, her former Senate experience evident in her comfortable command of complex issues. "Colonel Richardson," the President said, extending her hand, "please sit. We have much to discuss." Julia settled into the offered chair, her military bearing maintaining composure despite the surreal nature of her circumstances. The President of the United States was personally meeting with a colonel embroiled in discrimination charges, her case apparently requiring presidential attention. "You're wondering why you're here,"
President Foster observed, her political instincts reading Julia's confusion accurately. "The answer might surprise you." The president moved to the window, her gaze focusing on the Rose Garden where historic announcements had shaped American history. Her next words would reshape Julia's understanding of her recent struggles. "Colonel Richardson, 3 months ago, Secretary Harrison submitted your name as his recommended successor for Secretary of Defense. Your file has been under review by my senior staff, the Joint Chiefs, and intelligence agencies. The consensus is unanimous. You are the most qualified candidate for the position." Julia's breath caught, her military composure cracking for the first time. Secretary of Defense? The revelation seemed impossible, a twist that reframed every moment of her recent persecution. "Ma'am," she managed, her voice barely steady, "I had no idea such consideration was underway." "The selection process is highly classified," President Foster explained, returning to her desk. "We couldn't risk political interference or premature leaks that might compromise national security or your personal safety." The president activated a secure tablet, displaying Julia's comprehensive file. Her service record glowed on the screen. Combat decorations, advanced degrees, leadership evaluations that read like testimonials to military excellence. "Your record speaks for itself," the president continued. 3 combat tours, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, distinguished graduate from the War College. But more importantly, you represent the future of American military leadership. Julia struggled to process the magnitude of this revelation. While fighting discrimination charges, she had unknowingly been selected for the nation's highest military appointment. The irony was overwhelming, almost surreal in its perfect timing. "Colonel Whitmore's discrimination charges actually strengthened our conviction," President Foster observed, her tone hardening. "Any officer who would obstruct advancement based on racial bias has no place in modern military leadership." The president leaned forward, her expression intense. "Colonel Richardson, I'm offering you the position of Secretary of Defense, making you the first Black woman to hold this office. Your appointment will send a clear message about America's commitment to military excellence regardless of demographics." Julia's mind reeled as she considered the implications. Her personal battle against discrimination had unknowingly been preparation for historic responsibility. The systematic obstruction that had nearly destroyed her career was about to be transformed into unprecedented opportunity. "Ma'am, I'm honored by your confidence," Julia replied, her military training helping her maintain composure despite the emotional whirlwind. "But I must ask about the tribunal proceedings." President Foster smiled, the expression conveying both warmth and political calculation. "The tribunal's decision, whatever it may be, is irrelevant. Your appointment transcends military bureaucracy. You'll be resigning your commission to assume civilian leadership of the Defense Department." The meeting concluded with security briefings and appointment procedures, the machinery of government preparing to reshape Julia's life completely. As she prepared to leave, President Foster offered final words that would echo in her memory. "Colonel Richardson, sometimes our greatest struggles prepare us for our greatest opportunities. Your battle against discrimination has demonstrated the integrity and courage we need in military leadership."
The return flight to Fort Braxton passed in a haze of disbelief and anticipation. Julia carried a secret that would transform not just her career, but potentially military culture itself. Her appointment would be announced within days, stunning a military establishment still grappling with her discrimination charges. As her plane descended toward North Carolina, Julia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this unprecedented moment. The discrimination that had threatened to destroy her career had become the crucible that forged her into history. Julia returned to Fort Braxton carrying a secret that felt heavier than her classified security clearance. The base hummed with familiar activity, soldiers conducting evening formations while she walked toward her quarters, her mind still reeling from the presidential revelation. Within hours, her entire world would change. But for now, she remained Colonel Julia Richardson, awaiting a tribunal decision that had already become irrelevant. The secure phone in her quarters rang precisely at 1900 hours, Major Vance's voice carrying the weight of completed investigation. Colonel Richardson, the tribunal has reached its verdict. Please report to the courtroom at 0800 hours tomorrow for the official announcement. Julia acknowledged the order while suppressing the urge to reveal that military justice no longer controlled her fate. Tomorrow's announcement would be overshadowed by news that would stun the entire defense establishment. That evening, she sat with Sarah and Alexis in their kitchen, the normalcy of family dinner contrasting sharply with the historic magnitude of her secret. Sarah's psychologist intuition detected her changed demeanor immediately. "You seem different," Sarah observed, studying Julia's face for clues. "More relaxed, despite everything." Julia forced a neutral expression, her military training serving her well in maintaining operational security. "Just ready for this to be over, one way or another." Alexis looked up from her homework, her 16-year-old directness cutting through adult subtlety. "Mom, are you going to be okay? I mean, really okay?" The question pierced Julia's heart, reminding her that her struggles had affected the entire family. Her daughter had watched her mother endure systematic discrimination, the stress visible despite Julia's attempts to shield her family from professional battles. "Yes, sweetheart, everything is going to be okay." The tribunal convened the following morning to a packed courtroom, media representatives anticipating a decision that would define military equal opportunity enforcement. Colonel Hayes called the proceedings to order, her expression revealing nothing about the panel's deliberations. "After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony," Hayes announced, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom, "this tribunal finds Colonel Derek Whitmore guilty of discrimination based on race in violation of military equal opportunity policies." The courtroom erupted in restrained celebration from Julia's supporters, while Whitmore's allies sat in stunned silence. Julia felt vindication wash over her. 20 years of endured discrimination finally acknowledged by official military justice. "Colonel Whitmore is hereby reduced in rank to lieutenant colonel and reassigned to administrative duties pending retirement. His conduct violated the fundamental principles of military service and damaged unit cohesion through prejudicial behavior." Whitmore's face contorted with rage and disbelief, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of official censure. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, his primary ally, visibly distanced himself, political survival instincts overriding personal loyalty. "Furthermore," Hayes announced, "this tribunal commends Colonel Richardson for her courage in exposing systematic discrimination. Her actions have strengthened military commitment to equal opportunity and merit-based advancement." Julia accepted the commendation with quiet dignity, her vindication complete but no longer her primary concern. Within hours, news would break that would transform her from victimized colonel to historic appointee. Captain Chen approached after the proceedings, her relief and joy evident. "Ma'am, we did it. Justice prevailed." "We did," Julia agreed, but her mind was already focused on the larger transformation awaiting her. The discrimination battle had been won, but a greater opportunity beckoned. That afternoon, Julia's secure phone delivered the expected message. "Presidential announcement scheduled for 1600 hours Eastern. Prepare for immediate media attention." She gathered Sarah and Alexis in their living room, the television tuned to news coverage of the tribunal verdict. National headlines proclaimed military discrimination exposed, while pundits debated implications for military culture. "There's something I need to tell you both," Julia began, her voice carrying the gravity of historic revelation. "This morning I received confirmation of something that will change our lives completely." Sarah leaned forward, her psychologist training recognizing the significance of Julia's demeanor. Alexis looked up from her phone, sensing the moment's importance. "The President has appointed me as the next Secretary of Defense," Julia announced, her words landing like a thunderbolt in their quiet living room. At precisely 1600 hours, President Foster appeared in the Rose Garden, Julia standing beside her in dress blues. The assembled media corps buzzed with speculation about the surprise announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," President Foster began, her voice carrying across the White House grounds, "I am proud to announce my nominee for Secretary of Defense, Colonel Julia Richardson, who will become the first black woman to hold this critical position." The media explosion was immediate and overwhelming. News helicopters circled Fort Braxton while reporters scrambled to cover the historic appointment. Julia's discrimination case, resolved mere hours earlier, now seemed like preparation for this unprecedented moment. Meanwhile, in a cramped administrative office at Fort Braxton's motor pool, newly demoted Lieutenant Colonel Derek Whitmore watched the announcement on a small television. His face reflected the complete destruction of his worldview. The officer he had systematically oppressed, now ascending to control the entire Defense Department. His military career was effectively over, his reputation destroyed, his discriminatory beliefs exposed as not just morally wrong, but professionally suicidal. The black woman he had deemed unfit for promotion was about to become his ultimate superior. Julia's phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from military leaders worldwide. General Martinez's text was particularly satisfying. "Told you the universe had plans. Congratulations, Madam Secretary." As evening fell over Fort Braxton, Julia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this historic moment. The discrimination that had nearly broken her spirit had become the crucible that prepared her for unprecedented responsibility. Tomorrow, she would begin the transition from colonel to cabinet member, her personal victory transformed into national progress. But tonight, she simply held her family close, savoring the sweet taste of vindication and the promise of change to come. 3 weeks later, Julia Richardson stood in the Capitol building's ceremonial chamber, her right hand raised as Chief Justice Roberts administered the oath of office. The marble columns seemed to lean inward, bearing witness to a moment that would reshape American military history. "I, Julia Richardson, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States." Her voice carried across the packed chamber, each word weighted with historic significance. President Foster watched with satisfaction, her bold appointment validated by the Senate's overwhelming confirmation vote. Even Republican senators had been unable to oppose Julia's impeccable qualifications, her military record speaking louder than political calculations. Sarah and Alexis sat in the front row, their faces glowing with pride. Alexis had abandoned her teenage reserve, openly weeping as she watched her mother become the first black woman to lead the Defense Department. Sarah gripped her daughter's hand, both understanding they were witnessing history. In the audience, General Martinez beamed with the satisfaction of a mentor whose guidance had helped shape a transformational leader. Colonel Bradley, despite his retirement, had flown from Virginia to witness his former subordinate's unprecedented achievement. Captain Chen, now promoted to major, watched with quiet satisfaction. Her meticulous documentation had helped expose Whitmore's discrimination, but more importantly, it had preserved evidence of Julia's excellence for history. As Julia completed the oath, the chamber erupted in sustained applause. Supreme Court justices, congressional leaders, and military brass rose in unison, their standing ovation reflecting respect that transcended political boundaries. In her inaugural address as secretary, Julia spoke with the measured authority that had defined her military career. "Today marks not just personal achievement, but institutional progress. The Defense Department's strength lies in its diversity, its commitment to merit over prejudice, and its unwavering dedication to protecting American values." Her words carried special meaning for the military officers present, many of whom had watched her discrimination battle unfold. The message was clear: excellence would be rewarded regardless of demographics. Meanwhile, Derek Whitmore watched the ceremony from his new assignment, processing discharge paperwork at a remote Army facility in Alaska. The man who had questioned Julia's cultural fit now witnessed her commanding the entire military establishment, his own career destroyed by the prejudice he had wielded as a weapon. The irony was complete and devastating. His systematic discrimination had not only failed to prevent Julia's advancement, but had inadvertently prepared her for historic responsibility. Every slight, every obstruction, every coded insult had strengthened her resolve and demonstrated the leadership qualities that caught presidential attention. As the ceremony concluded, Julia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this unprecedented moment. 20 years of military service, months of documented discrimination, a tribunal victory that became irrelevant within hours of its announcement. Her phone buzzed with messages from military leaders worldwide, congratulating America's first black female defense secretary. The symbolism was powerful, but Julia understood that symbolism without substance was meaningless. Her first official act would be implementing comprehensive equal opportunity reforms, ensuring that future officers of all backgrounds could advance based on merit rather than demographics. The discrimination that had nearly destroyed her career would become the catalyst for institutional change. President Foster approached as the crowd dispersed, her smile reflecting political and personal satisfaction. "Madam Secretary, welcome to the Cabinet. Your real work begins now."
Julia nodded, understanding the magnitude of her responsibilities. Leading the Defense Department required more than surviving discrimination. It demanded strategic vision, operational excellence, and the ability to transform an institution steeped in tradition. That evening, as she stood on the Pentagon's executive balcony overlooking the Potomac River, Julia Richardson contemplated her extraordinary journey. From Detroit girl to West Point graduate, from combat veteran to discrimination victim, from embattled colonel to historic cabinet member. The lights of Washington stretched before her, each representing the citizens she had sworn to protect. Her appointment sent a message that would resonate far beyond military circles. In America, merit could still triumph over prejudice. Excellence could overcome institutional barriers, and individual courage could reshape entire systems. Colonel Derek Whitmore's discrimination had backfired spectacularly, his prejudice becoming the very force that elevated his target to unprecedented heights. Justice, delayed but not denied, had transformed personal struggle into national progress. As Julia prepared to lead the Defense Department into a new era, she carried with her the lessons learned from 20 years of service and months of systematic oppression. The discrimination that had nearly broken her spirit had instead forged her into the leader America needed. Her story would inspire countless others facing similar battles, proving that persistence, excellence, and courage could overcome even the most entrenched prejudice. The first black woman Secretary of Defense had not just achieved personal vindication, but had opened doors for generations to follow. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.